I sat with the man for several hours, telling him my story and how I ended up at his doorstep. I was silent for a while, then he said, "You only have one solution," so I told him, "What is it?" So he got up from his place and motioned for me to follow him. I went behind him to a large room full of huge books and volumes. It was like a public library, and its shelves were high. Some of them require a short staircase to reach them. He said to me while I was staring at that huge library with an open mouth and wide eyes, "Do you like to read?" I said to him while my mouth was still open and my eyes were staring at those high shelves, "I love it, but not to the degree that you do." The man laughed and said, "Look for him among these books and you will find him. And you find his name and then you will know how to get rid of him." I closed my mouth and turned my gaze to him and said to him, "But where do I start?" He said as he pulled out a chair and placed it behind me. "It does not matter which book you start from, it will not make a difference because we know nothing about him. You are, as they say, searching for a needle in a haystack." I sat on the chair and stared at that huge library. While I was staring at it, the man put his hands on my shoulders and said, "Don't waste time. It might take a long time." I smiled and told him, "I promised my mother that I would not be late, and I don't intend to." He raised his hands from his shoulders as they were leaving the library and said, "Then let's begin." I started reading and thought it would take hours, or at most a few days, but it took 3 full years, of which only a few weeks were missing, and every time I tried to go out when I was in a state of despair, in order to reassure my family and my mother in particular, the man would warn me against going out and what he might do with that thing standing outside if I took one step outside the door. I lived among those accursed books that talked about everything related to the other world. I became familiar with many of their sciences, but I did not know anything about my devil who stands at the door. A friendship developed between me and the man over those years, and he began to pity my condition and was always repeating, a word I will never forget as long as I live. He used to say, "Be patient with your sin." I did not know what it means, but I loved hearing it from him and felt comfortable when he said it. During those 3 years, I read more than 2/3 of the library, which was a collection of books, blogs, and individual papers, in addition to some strange symbols that carried unknown meanings. I did not understand their meaning except with an explanation from whoever. That man, on a day I will never forget. The rain was falling heavily on the slopes of the Green Mountain. I read this line. "It shed from the blackness of the laughing, gaping jinn. A jinn rising from the dust, and its master was crying in Aden." I remembered the word jinn, which was written in the black book in a different handwriting. I began to cry unconsciously, holding the book to the man in his hands, indicating this the cursed name is on my finger. I am crying like a child, as if I were imprisoned. I had just received the seal of his innocence. The man looked at me with the book open in front of him and said, "Is this your devil, boy?" I nodded yes, because my voice was stolen from me from so much crying. The man made me sit next to him and told me the story of the domestication of the rebellious mate. In detail, after the man finished telling the story of jinn, he told me that the book I had read was not about the Quran. It was a trick to conjure jinn, and this is a trick used by some magicians and sorcerers to release their demons and enable them to reach the general public to harm them. I said to him while smiling, "I know this information. I have read about this topic in one of your books a few months ago." The man stood up and closed the book. And he said to me, "Are you ready to leave?" So I said to him, "Since the first day I entered your house, and before I left, the man told me to repeat the name Dajjal so that you can lock him in his place forever, and you must say it before you leave, because he might kill you seconds before you say it." So I left and I repeated it. Dajjal Dajjal Dajjal, and I stopped repeating it when I was a few meters away from the house and nothing happened, so I turned my gaze towards the door of the house to find the man standing at his door smiling. I returned to the man and said goodbye to him and thanked him warmly for his dream and patience with me during those years and for helping me get rid of the demon that had disturbed the peace of my life, and I headed off. I rushed towards the car that had been parked for 3 years, and all I could think about was whether it would work. I got in the car and before I turned to Muharraq, the man said to me in a loud
voice from in front of the balcony of his house, "Next time you come back, bring me some figs from your country." I laughed and said to him in a louder voice, "I will never come back, good man." He said laughing, "You will come back. Believe me, you will come back," and he was with him. The true story of Dajjal as the man told it to me. When I saw the name Dajjal in that book and I told the man that he was the devil who was chasing me, he in turn told me about the story of Dajjal, the rebellious companion. He told me that Dajjal was a companion of the magician Najd, so I remembered that I had read in one of his books that the name of the companion was the opposite of the first name. Its owner has a spoken word, not a written one, and if the owner of the name changes his name, the name of its counterpart will remain the opposite of its name he was born with it. This magician lived in 1800s of years ago, and he was always messing with people by trying magic and talismans on them. Many people were hurt by him, and there was no one to deter him from his actions. On the day he tried to harm a passerby in the market, he found himself paralyzed and unable to move. With her, he felt severe pain in his chest and fell to the ground, struggling with the pain and the inability to move. When the magician Najd was in this state, the man who wanted to harm him approached him and said to him, "You have chosen the wrong person to harm this time, Najd." Then the man recited some of the talismans that freed Karen. The magician, Najd, ordered the man, the companion, to torture Najd until he died, and then he would come to him, and indeed, Dajan brutally tortured the magician until he died. Daja went to the man as he ordered him after he finished killing and torturing his friend, Najd. It became clear that the man was a powerful magician and well known among the great magicians, and his power was far superior to Najd. So the magician told Dajan that he was free to do so whatever he wants, on the condition that he does not kill any human being except those who deal in preparation and sorcery. He also said to him, "I will write a book for you. Anyone who reads it has the right to kill him after you have entertained him for a while, but be careful not to let anyone know your name. If he says it, you will be locked in your place until someone else brings you." After that, the two separated. The Book of Jinn continued to circulate from west to east, killing everyone who read it, until it fell into the hands of a man. A woman from the people of Hijaz wanted to know about preparing the Karen and reading the book, so a demon came out to her to kill her for you. He wanted to remain free forever, and he burned the book to prevent anyone from freezing it again, and when you prepared it, that was his chance to do that and free himself forever. After the man finished telling the story of a jinn, I asked him, "How did you know all this?" He was silent for a while. Then said, "We magic deal with a lot of the jinn and demons, and news always reaches us from them at lightning speed, so we write it down in books and blogs, and this is part of our agreement with them." But news of Dajan stopped for a while, and no one heard from him until you prepared him and released him. I said to him, "Why, if you told me that you do not know the name of my devil?" And he said while smiling, "There are hundreds or even thousands of demons. Those who mention in the blogs daily. Do you think that you are alone or that Daj is the only one whose news has been transmitted?" Then the news was about him and not about you. I was silent for a while, then I asked him a final question and said, "Will Daj remain imprisoned forever if I say his name?" He said yes, so right. Preparing it, it was burned, and the only person who knows how to prepare it and freeze it and is still alive is just you and me. And with death, he dies. He is imprisoned because he will not find anyone to free him. I smiled and said goodbye to the man and went out to love Jah forever. The trip back to my country. I will not go into the details of what happened to me at the airport and the difficulty of returning to my country. I had no money and there was a report registered in my name to search for me in that place. The state, because of the report submitted by my family as a missing person, my security handover to my state, and the investigation with me for a period of time. These are matters that will take a long time to explain, so I will start from the moment I arrived home and entered the door after 3 years of absence. My family's reception was a mixture of joy for my return and sadness and anger at my departure. He was my brother. At that time, he was 20 years old, and I was about to be 3 years old, and my mother seemed tired and sick. My mother was crying while kissing me, and my father was praying for me and Ali at the same time, and my brother was smiling with tears in his eyes, and I was among them, smiling in relief because everything was over, and at that moment I decided to forget the past and take back the reins of my life. I was separated from university, but my country is a country of connections, so I returned to school within a few days and began to study like any other student, and my life returned to normal until my brother entered my room one day, and it was between sunset and dinner, and he began to cry in fear and say, "Help me, brother, I can't bear it anymore." So I said to him, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "After your departure and sudden disappearance, we searched for you everywhere, but we found no trace of you. We asked all of our relatives about you, and no one told us anything that would lead us to you except our relative, the son of the old man." He meant the son of the man who gave me the 2 books. "He told me that you came to his house on the night that I disappeared into it and searched his rooms." His father. I read some of his books, and I quickly left them, so I asked him to give me those books, and before he could complete his sentence, I shouted at him and said, "Did you take those books?" He replied while crying, "Yes, and I only read 1 book, and since that time I cannot sleep. Please help me, brother." I told him to come. All the books, including the one I read, my brother brought a lot of books, and because of my extensive experience and knowledge that I gained from the man's library, I sorted the books into 3 categories: real preparation books, fake preparation books, and magic and binding books. I asked my brother to point to the book he had read, and my heart longed for it to be one of the preparation books. The illusion, but unfortunately I was disappointed, as the book he chose was a preparation book. He is actually responsible for preparing a demon named Yaram, and he is a very powerful upper demon who tortures those who bring him with nightmares and tampering with his body until he gets bored of him and kills him. Yaram is not an easy demon, as I have read about him before that he possesses unusual powers and descends from the Al-Abid tribe and is the son of one of its masters. I asked my brother to leave and reassured me that everything would be fine. Then I looked through the remaining books using experience. I used to read the hieroglyphs with my mind, not with my lips, because some of them have no effect if you do not pronounce them audibly. While flipping through the books, I found among them a book for preparing a companion. It was real, it was not a trap. As was the case with the book Jan, and according to what I read in it, the liberated companion can be controlled. And subjugating him with some talismans that I memorized from the library, and the liberated Karen will be stronger than many demons, including Yaram himself, so I decided to prepare it, and if I had known what would happen next, I would not have attended it, but due to my young age at that time, the weakness of my religious conscience, and my ignorance of what is permissible and what is forbidden in matters. This world and what I went through in the past 3 years had an impact on my decisions, so I did not think at the time about the harm that might result from messing around in such a world. I carried out everything mentioned on the preparation page to the letter, and a companion appeared in front of me with problems, but he was a little different. He was without one of his eyes. Said to me, "Thank you, brother, I will get rid of Yaram for you now." Then he disappeared, and after a short while, I heard a strong screaming sound coming from my brother's room, so I quickly went to him and entered his room to find him on his bed, drowned in a pool of blood, crying in the middle of it, and he was not suffering from any wounds, so I said to him while I quickly examined his body, "What?" A young man said, "I don't know, you are the one who entered upon me and asked me to close my eyes, so I did." Then I felt this blood covering my body all at once, so he hugged my brother, realizing that Yaram had died at the hands of Karini, and this blood that covered my brother was nothing but the blood of the son of the master of the father, Yaram. My brother's problem with Yaram was over. His life returned to normal, and during that period my life also returned to normal with my friends, family, and colleagues. In school, about a year after this incident, my peer visited me in a dream and said to me, "Today, brother, your religion is ending." I woke up thinking about that sentence, but I could not understand its meaning. The next day, after I went to sleep a few hours, I woke up terrified by a scream that was very close to my ears, and after I woke up, I heard a voice similar to my voice coming from inside my room, but I could not see the face of the speaker, and the voice was repeating the name of a well-known place in our city. After the sound stopped, I decided to go to that area, and it was around 1 o'clock in the morning, so I got into my car and headed to the area and started wandering around in it and among its houses and shops until I saw someone pointing. In the past, I would not have stood for such a strange person, at such an hour, and in this place that is relatively unknown to me, but it seems that my heart has died during the past 4 years. I stopped, opened the window, and asked what the man wanted from me. He blamed me for being late and asked me to enter his house. I went downstairs. From the car, I was confused between entering and leaving, so I decided to enter. I entered a narrow place that looked like a small house, and I smelled a smell similar to the smell I smelled in the house of the man with whom I stayed for 3 years. I entered and heard a voice calling and saying, "Say, who is here?" I headed towards the voice and found a person sitting on the floor. He resembles in his dress and appearance my friend with whom I stayed in the Green Mountain. The person who opened the door for me was standing behind him with a cup in his hand. I could not see its contents because it was not transparent. The standing man asked me to sit in front of the other man and said, "Are you ready?" I told him, "Ready." Why exactly did he say to the final stage of his inauguration? I said, "Inauguration? What are you talking about?" The man sitting there got angry and shouted at me, saying, "Did you come here to mock me?" I shouted at him and said, "Are you crazy?" The man who was standing put the cup on the ground and quickly got up and took me outside, saying, "What's wrong?" He did it, so I shouted at him and said, "What's wrong with you?" He responded with anger and surprise and said, "Stop it. All the difficult conditions, and when you reach the easy stage, I stand up." I did not understand anything from him and I told him, "I will leave." It seems that I came to the wrong place, and before I left, the man grabbed my arm and said, "They will not allow you to escape from them so easily. You are one of them now, and the inauguration ceremony must be completed." I got away from him and went out and got into my car and returned home to find my brother in a state of fear, and he told me that my mother suddenly screamed and then fell to the ground and they were taken to the hospital. I went quickly to the hospital and the doctor told me that she was in a coma, and he told me that he did not know the cause of the condition. I entered on her quickly and saw signs on her that the doctor had not seen, and I read about it in one of the books in that damned library. They all indicated that she had been subjected to demonic touch, sent and not chosen, meaning that someone had sent her a demon to tamper with her. Nothing came to my mind except that crazy man and his assistant, so I got into my car and headed to his house with the intention of taking revenge. I headed home and dawn was approaching. I knocked on the door hard and it opened for me. A man I had never seen before, and I said to him, "Where is the one who lives here?" He said, "I am the one who lives here." I told him, "You are a liar." I quarreled with him, and the people who were going to far prayer gathered around us and separated us. So I got into my car and left on my way home. I was driving my car quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a relative of mine appeared in the car and was sitting in the seat next to the driver. He said loudly, "Dink." The day passed. I was terrified of it and lost control of the steering wheel. A terrible accident happened to me, as a result of which I was taken to the hospital. I did not suffer from any fractures or wounds, even though the car was completely destroyed. The doctor came in and it was around 6 in the morning and said, "I miraculously survived, and you will get out of here, with permission." By God, tomorrow my brother visited me in the hospital and I recommended that he recite Surah Al-Baqarah next to my mother and sleep with her that night and wipe Zamzam water on her forehead. My brother left and I slept a little until the afternoon, and when I woke up I felt very cold, so I asked the nurse to turn off the air conditioning, but nothing changed. I asked her for an extra cover but nothing. This worked, so I tried to get out of bed, but I could not because I felt something heavy on my chest, something that was almost crushing my ribs, and the weight began to increase gradually until it pinned me completely to the bed. I tried to scream, but something muffled my mouth. I knew at the time that it was my horn that I freed, and that he returned to obtain that debt he was talking about when the pressure eased from my mouth. After about 5 minutes, I was able to move my tongue and say, "What do you want?" No one responded to me. So I repeated the phrase and raised my voice each time until the pressure on my mouth returned again. I heard a whisper in my voice in my ear saying, I want to communicate with you. I want you to respond to them. I want you to see me. I did not understand. He kept pressing his words to my chest and started beating me severely until I fainted and woke up. In the morning, I heard the doctor's voice telling me what you did to yourself. I did not know what he meant until I saw the bandages covering my chest and arms and wrappings around my head. I slowly got out of bed and the doctor was trying to catch me as I got away from him. In the end, I succeeded in leaving the hospital and headed home. I met my brother and told him I must travel, so he walked away and said, You will not travel again. I told him, I must travel, otherwise I will not forgive myself if something bad happens to my mother. He said, What does your travel have to do with her? I told him, No, just wait for me. I headed to the door, and my brother was complaining about me and what would happen to my father because of my absence for the second time. I did not respond to him. Except for one question when I grabbed the door handle. On my way out of the house, I said to him, Are we in the fig season? The 3 years I spent locked in the library. The man with whom I spent 3 years of my life against my will and without my choice was S. His name was Ammar, as he told me later, from the first day I spent with him. I became agitated and fell into my own state, especially when I was searching for a long time to find jinn in his books. I was confined to the place, and he would go out from time to time to bring food. His house was isolated from the city in the middle of green ruins. I was always bored and worried about the condition of my family after my departure, and I was very angry with him because he refused to communicate with them and reassure their charges on me and on my condition, but I understood the reason for his fear after the time I spent with Ammar. It was not simple, and it affected my personality and behavior greatly, and at a later stage, it distanced me from my religion and created a different person from me. The first minute in Ammar's house, that minute was full of astonishment at his appearance and the appearance of his house, which was simple and consisted of only one floor and did not have many rooms. Its roof was covered with wood, even though the house was made of brick. I did not speak at that minute, but I realized that I had entered a different world, a world completely different from the world I came from. Since that minute, the desire to leave his house haunted me. The first hour in Ammar's house was the hour that Ammar gave me a key. My salvation, and at the same moment he threw him into the sea deep and he told me to go and look for him, and I was not good at swimming. I spent my first hour at his house reading hurriedly in order to catch my plane before it took off. I did not know at the time that the flight would be delayed a little. When Ammar gave me the option to start from any book, I did not think about the choice specifically, but rather extended it. My hand was on the first book I saw, and I opened it and started reading without rest or concentration. I was looking for something I did not know, so I did not find it. I turned the pages and most of the time I did not understand anything because those books were talking to the reader as if he knew what the words and symbols meant, so I went to Ammar after half an hour of reading. And I told him why. I understand something of what is written, but I do not think I can complete it. He said, You will not understand anything at first, but continue and I promise you that you will understand. I closed the book and placed it on the table that was next to Ammar. I took a deep breath and said to him, I cannot. He said, Do you intend to stay here forever? I remained silent as I looked. In his two eyes, they were staring at me seriously. Then I said to him, I cannot. Ammar got up from his place, and with his left hand he held the book, and with his right hand he grabbed my shoulder and shook me and said in a stern tone, I was able to read the book preparing that devil, and you will be able to find the book that will save you from it. I extended my hand and took the book with my left, and I said, I wish I could. I didn't read that book after that. I got up from my place and I returned to the library and continued reading the book. The first day with Ammar. I stayed reading in the library until the sun went down and did not feel the time until Ammar came in to me just after it had set with a lamp in his hand and said, did you find anything? I told him no, and I did not understand anything either. He laughed and said, stop. Read now and come to eat. I said to him, I cannot. I must find what I am looking for. He said to me, I do not want you to read at sunset. I told him, why, and he said, don't ask me now. I will tell you the reason. One day, I got up from my place and headed to the living room to find Ammar sitting with a single bowl with a strange mixture in it. It was like harissa, and he said to me, please have dinner with me. I did not want to start eating that food. The food that Ammar brought was strange and did not resemble the food I was accustomed to. When I asked him about the type of food and its source, he told me to eat and do not ask. I hesitated at first, but my hunger forced me to taste. I noticed that Ammar did not give a name and was eating with his left hand, but I did not. I will comment on what I noticed after finishing the food. Ammar asked me and said how I found the food. I told him it was good. I said that out of taste, but the food was almost tasteless and did not contain any salt or any source of taste. But I did not want to be rude to the one who opened his house door to me. I went back to reading immediately. After eating, although Ammar tried to convince me to postpone it until tomorrow, but I did not. I wanted to waste time, so I left for the airport. It was a day later. I entered the office and it was dark, so I looked for a source of electricity to turn on the lights, but I did not find any, even though I remembered that there was a light in my living room when we were eating. I returned to the living room and found Ammar sitting writing in one of the rooms. He wrote his blogs and looked up to look for the source of the light in the room. I found a lamp that ran on oil. I was amazed and asked Ammar, don't you have electricity in this house? Ammar did not answer my question and continued writing. I repeated the question to him more than once, but he was writing with concentration, as if he was not aware of anything of what was around him. I returned to the library and began searching about the source of light in it, and during my research, Ammar and Wafi came to me. He held a lamp that was not hanging in the living room and said, take use of this lamp. I told him, what happened a little while ago? Why didn't you answer me? Ammar ignored my question and entered the office, holding the lamp in his hand and saying, come, I will show you something. I caught up with him and forgot about my question. Ammar sat down. The table that was in the middle of the library, and he placed the lamp in the middle. Then he brought 2 books and placed them next to each other and said, open the 2 books. I sat next to Ammar and opened the first book and found it similar to the books I had read that day. Then I opened the second book and found it different, as it was handwritten. So I said to him, what do you want to say to me? He said there are 2 types of books. Printed books are good, but they are not rare, and there are several copies of them, but of handwritten books, there is only 1 copy, or at the most 2 copies in this world, and I own 5 of them. I said to him, why are you telling me that? And he said, don't read books written in handwriting. So I said why, and he said, I am not ready for it yet, so I said, but perhaps my salvation is within its folds, and he said, do not worry, I know its content, and it does not contain anything that will benefit you. I did not argue with Ammar much because I was not keen on reading more of his books. In fact, I was happy because the books that I had to her reading has now decreased by 5 books after hours of reading under the lamplight. Ammar came to me before dawn and said, "You must sleep now." I said to him, "I cannot. I must find what I need." He said, "This is not a request, but rather an order." So I said, "I am tired. Anyway, where will I sleep?" Ammar returned to the living room, then returned with a solid quilt, gave it to me, and said, "I will." She sleeps in the library on the floor. I told him, "Don't you have a pillow?" He said, "You don't need one." Then he went out and closed the door on me. The first week with Ammar. The first days in Ammar's house were the most difficult. I was like a prisoner who wanted to get out of his prison and end his suffering. I was in an unstable psychological state. I was very nervous. Especially after missing my trip that would have taken me back to my country, I was reading books quickly and hastily too. I reached the goal of the unknown as quickly as possible, and I ignored Ammar's advice to be careful and reflect on the written words and not to pass over them unnoticed. I was not listening to his words and continued to read in my own way, but to no avail. I did not understand what I was reading, and I did not know what to search for. I was in a vortex, not to mention about some of the disgusting words written in those books, glorifying demons. These books were like that disgusting mush that I ate with Ammar on the first day, which later became clear to me that it was his daily food and that he did not eat anything else. I had no choice but to eat it with him. He imposed on me a new life system. Different from my routine, Ammar used to close the door. Ali is in the library from sunset until sunrise, and he only leaves with me a lamp and a little oil, enough for 2 hours of reading. I did not know the reason for him doing that. I said to myself at the time that perhaps he did not want to bear the expenses of oil. I confronted Ammar on about the 4th day and asked him why he closed the office door on me. In the evening, he said, "Why do you want to go out?" I said to him, "I do not want to go out, but I do not want to feel that I am a prisoner in it." He said, "You are indeed a prisoner in it, and when you realize that, your cover is available." I shouted at him and said, "Death is easier than what I am in." He said, "Death awaits you outside, and I did not prevent you from hugging it." I remained silent and lowered my gaze to the ground and back to the library. To complete the reading, the first month with Ammar. This period may have been the most difficult period I spent with Ammar. I was very upset during it and began to get bored with reading, food, and everything. I fell ill during this period twice. Ammar used to give me a strange drink to drink during my illness, and despite the fact that I was sick. Both times it was different, except that he gave me the same drink. I did not mind its bitter taste because it was a nice change from that disgusting mush. During that month, I began to get to know more about Ammar's daily routine and began to notice the strangeness of the lifestyle he was living. He rarely left the house and wrote more than he read. Sometimes he mumbled to himself. The words I did not understand, let alone talking to himself sometimes. However, Ammar was not keen on hiding his strange lifestyle from me. He was dealing with me as if I was not present or accustomed to these things, and indeed, with time, I began to get used. The house. I did not discover that there was no toilet until after the first day when I needed it. Ammar told me, I relieve myself outside, so I told him, what should I do? I cannot. Get out of here. Ammar laughed hard. I asked him, is this a time to laugh, and he said, sorry, but your situation now is funny, so I said to him, give me the solution and laugh as much as you want. So Ammar went out and came back with a metal bucket and said, this will be your bathroom for the duration of your time here. I did not argue, and I entered the library and relieved myself. Then I came back and told him, I need water to wash, and he said, water. It is scarce here, and the well from which I get water is not nearby, so I said to him, please, I cannot survive without bathing. He sympathized with me for the first time and brought me water. That period was difficult and arduous. Many of the means of life that I had taken for granted were taken away from me. It was a shower once a month, and little by little I was convinced. Ammar provides me with shower water once a week, but when it comes, the cold winter, and the water was almost frozen, I did not shower for more than 2 months. I did not drink anything other than water, and Ammar would drink a hot drink from time to time. I would ask him, "Is this tea or coffee?" and he would answer, "Do you want some?" And I would say, "I want to know its contents first," and he would reply. He takes another sip. "Believe me, you do not." And inhaled with all my might the scent of freedom that I had missed. The scent of fresh spring flowers was bright and the mountain breeze was cool and on us. I felt happy for the first time since I entered this house, but through inhaling this aroma. The smart one was shocked by a very unpleasant smell, resembling rotten eggs mixed with the smell of smoke, so I held my breath and closed the window. Ammar asked me and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I smelled a very unpleasant smell, like a burning carcass." "Did you burn something outside?" Ammar laughed and said, "The smell you described is the smell of your devil." It seems he approached the window. I was very much hoping that you would come out. I was silent as I looked outside through the window and said to myself, "I will find you among those books." The first year with Ammar, I continued reading. My tantrums continued to increase, but Ammar was patient and kind in a strange way. He believed in me more than I believed in myself, and I did not know it. The reason behind this is, but as the days went by, I began to get used little by little to Ammar's diet and lifestyle. The times we used to talk decreased because I no longer asked as I used to. The books became familiar, and some of them began to connect with others in my mind. I did not seek Ammar's help except in difficult matters. I used to stop reading at the time of the only meal that day. This is the harissa that Ammar insisted on eating daily, despite repeated attempts to convince him to change, even for a short period, but he vehemently refused. After several months of researching the books, Ammar started talking to me, and whenever he moved me, a good relationship developed between us, which prompted him to help him in his research. From time to time, I learned many things from him that were not written in books. He was a good man, even though he was a malicious magician. I remember one time that I said to him, "Ammar, do you not realize that the magician is an infidel?" He laughed and said, "What about the one who comes to him?" I remained silent and did not discuss the matter with him again. One day I asked him to he brought me shaving tools because the hair on my head, chin, and body started to bother me, so he refused and said, "There is too much hair." Poetry on the magician is a source of strength for him, so I told him, "I am not a magician, Ammar, and I do not want to be a magician." He said, "It is no longer an option. You are one of us and you will remain that way." I told him, "I am here forced, and as soon as I finish this demon of mine, I will get rid of this world. It has one door." And he was just to enter. I did not like what he said and I interrupted him for a whole week. After that, he came to reconcile with me and said to me, "I sent a messenger to your mother's dream to reassure you that she was on your side." So I eagerly told him how, so he put a book in my hand and said, "Read and learn." I refused and told him, "I will not read any of your books for no need, and my mother is a believer, and she will be there until I return." I was in the first year of my stay with him. I prayed and Ammar did not refuse, but he would leave from the place when I was doing that, but unfortunately in the last 2 years I neglected prayer because of what I was reading in those particular books. The month of Ramadan came during the first year, and it was the first time that I began to notice some changes in the daily routine. Days before the blessed month, Ammar brought a large amount of rice and some supplies and he said, "We will change the type of food in Ramadan for your sake." I was happy at first, but I was not sure of the truth of his words when he said that the change was for me. What made me more certain were the other changes that occurred, such as storing a large amount of water inside the house in barrels, as if it was preparing for an airstrike. It will descend on him from the sky. When Ammar finished his preparations, I sat next to him and the sweat was pouring from his forehead after carrying those heavy barrels. I told him, "What is happening? Do not tell me that you are doing this for me." He said, "We cannot go out during Ramadan." I told him, "I have been locked here for the whole time. The year anyway, what is the difference?" Ammar said, "The difference is that I will be locked up with you and we will not get food or water." I said to him, "Tell me why." Ammar got up and did not answer my question. Ramadan was a difficult month for Ammar, and I felt during it that his strength was weakening or disappearing, and I did not notice until the second year that he used to prepare enough food for the entire month of Ramadan so that it would not go out during the year. The third, I understood that his ability was weakening due to the binding of his demons during the holy month, so I asked him once why I do not go out in Ramadan, as the demons are bound in the sky, including that devil who is waiting for me, so he said to me, "Go and try, for I will not prevent you." My faith was not strong during that period, so I did not try, but I know today that God's words are true, and that Satan was binding them throughout the blessed month of Ramadan, and if I had gone out, I would not have been harmed, but my presence with Ammar and those books made me lose my faith and made me a captive to them. Ammar used to lock the door on me at sunset and only open it at sunrise, but during the month of Ramadan, he did not do this, but rather asked me to leave the office and sit with him. To talk constantly during the night, and from those long conversations throughout the night, I learned a lot of knowledge from him that I did not find in those books. In fact, he answered me many questions for which I could not find an explanation. During the reading, Ammar was different during Ramadan. He was tired and seemed sick or drunk. I did not ask him a lot about his condition because I knew he would not answer. One night, Ammar took out a pack of cigarettes and started smoking. This was the first time I saw him smoking. He extended a cigarette to me and said, "Take one." I told him, "I don't smoke." Then, "Did you not choose anything other than this holy month to start smoking?" He said, "And who said?" "He told you that I had never smoked before," so I said, "I have never seen you smoke before." He said, "I only smoke at night, when you were locked in the library." I said to him, "Why did you tell me, Ammar, why you locked me inside the library from sunset until sunrise before? Why do you think I would escape?" Ammar laughed hard, raised his head, blew a cloud of smoke, and said, "Where are you going to run to, and that devil is outside?" So I said to him, why do you close the door?" He said, "There are events that happen at night that I do not want you to see." I told him, "Like what?" He said, "It is still too early to know." I said to him, "Why do you only smoke at night?" He said, "Smoking during the day harms the areola." This was the first time I heard of the term areola, so I said, "What is the aura?" "It is one of the sources of my strength that made me stop that demon outside. Every human being has it. But its strength differs from one person to another, and how do you know whether your aura is strong or not?" He said, "By examining it by someone with an activated aura." I said, "It is activated." He said, "Yes, it is activated. All auras, whether strong or weak, are in a dormant phase and you must activate them in order to benefit from them." I told him, "Can you examine my aura?" He said, "Your aura is very strong, and I do not need to examine it." I told him, "How do you know that when you activate your aura, you can sense other auras easily? Do you want me to activate your aura?" I said, "I do not know what I will benefit from." He said, "You will see the world differently. Your sensory, mental, and physical abilities will multiply. You will be able to do things that I have never seen before." She could do it before he remained silent and I did not want him to continue his words, and he said, "And above all that, you will find it easier to read and understand these books, and you will not become tired and want to sleep much. Even with a little training, you will control the dreams and, in advanced stages, the dreams of others." I said, "To this degree, and he said, and much more than that, and what is required of me? Doing it, he said, your aura is strong, and activating it will not require the complicated methods that we use with weak auras, so I only need your acceptance. So I said, accept. What did he say? Your acceptance is for me to do your aura, so I said, I accept that. Ammar got up from his place and put his palm on my forehead, and I said to myself, it seems that this man is having fun with me. He wants to waste a little time but during the situation. His hand on my head. I heard a sound that I will never forget. It made me turn right and left, which prompted Ammar to ask me and say, what is wrong with you? Did you hear anything? I said to him, yes, a strong buzzing, as if it was the buzzing of a fly flying. Ammar laughed and raised his hand from my head, sat down, lit his cigarette, and said, congratulations, your aura has been activated. The fly is the evidence, so I told him, I think the flies are just evidence that we haven't showered for a while. Ammar laughed hard and started coughing from laughter. Then he said, the sound I heard was a fly flying at the end of the room. He was silent in amazement. Then I said, what is this strange fly that buzzes with such force? He said, the fly is normal. But now you are no longer normal and your senses are as well. So I asked him, is this what he did? The aura, and he said yes, and from now on you will start noticing strange things, so do not panic and remember that your abilities are different now. I did not understand the meaning of his words until the time for suhoor came and Ammar placed in front of me the usual daily dish, which is soup with a little rice. I do not know the contents of it, but it was a positive change from that harissa, but this time when I tasted the soup, it tasted different. It was tastier and the flavors were clear and I could distinguish them. So I told him, what did you put in the soup today? It tastes much better than before. He said, I did not put anything. It is the same soup that we have been eating since the beginning of Ramadan. I told him, it is impossible. The taste is completely different. He said, I told you. Activating your aura will change many things in your life, and this soup are the simplest. I took a second sip from the plate of soup, then I said, duck, salt, a little pepper, and a strange ingredient that I don't know. Ammar said, it is true, these are the ingredients of the soup. I said, how can I know that now? He said, it seems that you do not understand the meaning of activating the aura. Forget the topic now and let's go to sleep. I did not sleep right away. Tonight, I went back to the library to read, and the surprise was when I started to complete a book that I had started reading a few days ago. I found that my understanding of words and meanings had become deeper, and my reading abilities had developed, and I was finishing more pages in a much shorter time. I was memorizing and absorbing every word in a way that frightened me at first, but with time, I began to get used to my new abilities and enjoy them. Ammar told me once one night in Ramadan that I must hide my name and my mother's name from any magician so that he does not harm me. I told him, I know your name. Ammar said, it is not a name. It is the name I chose to represent me in front of the rest of the magicians. And you must have a name other than your own so that it does not reach you when you become one of us. I shouted at him forcefully and said, I will not become a magician. He responded calmly and said, "Choose a name even if you do not want to become a magician." He was silent, then I said, "How can he choose a name for me?" He said, "How do you feel now?" I told him, "I feel with fear." He said, "Your name from now on is Fear, and I will not call you anything else." Since then, in their world, I have been known as Fear, but I later discovered that Ammar is actually his real name and he did not hide it from anyone, and to this day I still do not know why he told me that his real name is not Ammar. The end of the blessed month of Ramadan was a real Eid for Ammar. He walked out the door on the morning of Eid and was happy. Very much, as if he had just come out of prison. I was watching him from the window and envied that freedom. Ammar came home and changed his clothes to go out. I told him, "Where are you going?" He said, wearing a new white abaya, "This is the first time you have asked me such a question. Have you become my guardian now?" I told him, "Don't evade it, Ammar. You will go." So he left the door while putting on his turban and saying, "I will not come again. Come back and continue reading until I come back." Ammar left the house and left me on the first Eid morning, and I did not want to read at that time, but I did not know what I could spend my time with. I noticed that Ammar went out and did not close the door, and I could not close it because the handle was outside the house, and I was not able to. I caught him without leaving the borders of the house, so I left the door open. After several hours, a tall, dark-skinned man came in and said, "Where is Ammar?" I told him, "He went out." He said, "Where?" and I said, "I don't know." He got angry and said, "Tell him that Fatima is looking for him." I told him, "Okay," and the man went out and closed the door on his way. Ammar returned. About an hour after the man left, when he entered, I told him what that man had told me. And he was not interested. Ammar placed a closed pot in front of me and said, "Open the pot, there is a surprise in it." I smiled and extended my hand toward the lid of the pot and raised it while smiling, but my smile quickly changed to sadness when I saw that disgusting mush again and I said angrily, "What is this, Ammar?" He said, smiling, "Our food. We can go back to eating it now after the end of Ramadan." I said to him, after I threw the cover on the floor and got up in front of him, "The favorite food is for you, not for me." I entered the office and started reading angrily. After a few minutes, Ammar entered the office. He repented and said, "Morocco is approaching. Are you sure that you want to stay the night without eating?" So I told him, "No, pay attention, I will never eat this mush again." I was fed up with her. Ammar did not respond to me. I tried to listen as much as I could, but I couldn't, so I was very surprised. After activating my aura, I could hear the tiniest sounds, but I couldn't hear that conversation that was going on between them. I decided the next day to confront Ammar and ask him about what I heard, but he denied it and said, "It seems you are delusional. I told you to activate it. Your aura will make you hear strange things, but this time you are delusional." So I told him, "I am not delusional, and you were talking to a woman. Why are you hiding this information from me? What do you think I will do?" He said, "There is no woman, so do whatever you want." Ammar left the house after this sentence, angry, but I did not care and began searching. I ran around the house with a sharp object. I wanted to make a hole in the door, so I could see with my own eyes who he was talking to. After a long search, I found a small nail, but its head was sharp, and I started drilling the door. Ammar came back before I finished making the necessary hole, so the nail disappeared in my pocket. I decided to drill every day when he came out. The conversation was repeated that night, but this time, I did not get up to eavesdrop. I stayed where I was, reading. This time, I heard the woman's laughter with Ammar, and I had a feeling that they were laughing at me. I don't know why, but that was my feeling at that moment. I continued digging for several days until I made the necessary hole in the door. I was eager to expose Ammar and confront him with the truth when the truth came. The evening began with reading, but my heart was stuck on knowing who she was. That woman, with whom Ammar was spending the whole night. I waited and waited for a long time and did not hear anything. I expected that she was busy that night and would come the next night, but she did not come and I did not hear her voice again. The last month with Ammar. I did not realize that my days with Ammar had come to an end and I was. At that stage, I had mastered their knowledge so much that Ammar offered me to be his assistant in case I found what I was looking for in his books, but I refused vehemently and said, "I told you before that I am not a magician, Ammar, and I will never be like that one day." So he said to me, "But you have it now. Of their knowledge is what makes you a master of them all." So I told him, "But that is no. It is enough for me to sell myself and my religion." He said sarcastically, "What religion? I have not seen you pray for a year." So I told him, "I admit my shortcomings, but this is not a reason for me to rush into the abyss." Ammar ended the conversation with a smile. When he realized that I would never follow his path by choice, Ammar decided to leave after this conversation. From the house to get food, so I said to him, "How can you go out when that devil is outside? Aren't you afraid that he will harm you?" He laughed and said, "Can an ant harm you?" I told him, "No," and he said, "Your devil, to me, is less than an ant." I said to him sarcastically, "And where do you get all this confidence?" He replied to me and said, "Do you want proof?" I said to him, "How are you going to prove that to me?" He said while smiling, "I will allow him to enter you now." So I was silent and my heart started beating and I told him, "Don't be late on your journey." He laughed out loud and went out for the last week with Ammar. This week was not out of the ordinary, but strange events occurred that I had not witnessed before, the most notable of which was that Ammar left me alone for 3 days and did not tell me. He accepted that he would be gone for all that time, so when he returned, I said to him angrily, "Why didn't you tell me that you would be gone for all that time? I almost died of hunger." He said coldly, "But you did not die, and I left you enough water." I said to him angrily, "Why didn't you tell me what you would have lost?" He laughed and said, "Do you want some harissa?" The last day with Ammar. I may be delusional, but I somehow felt like I was leaving this place at any moment. Even Ammar was dealing with me in a different way at that time, and it was as if we would part soon, but I did not know that that day was the day in which I would find the key to my salvation. I extended my hand to one of the shelves, as was my custom that morning, and pulled out a large, closed book. With a black leather cover, Ammar advised me to read it. I placed it on the table, opened it, and started reading. Ammar was sitting in the living room smoking during the day, as usual, so I started reading as usual at the last hour. I was reading while I was resting my hand and looking at those large pages. The rain began to fall heavily, and this was not strange and the place was quiet in that area and I was not there. I only heard Ammar puffing on his cigarette and I was saying to myself, "Why is he smoking now?" I had never seen him do that in broad daylight. I continued reading and did not think much about the reason for Ammar's smoking. The book was talking about the history of magic in the south of the island and it did not contain a lot of information. The process is why I felt bored while reading, and I thought more than once about closing it and looking for another book, but I remembered a word my father said to me when I first started reading as a child. Never close a book if you start reading it until you finish it. I continued reading until my eyes fell on that text, shining with a laughing blackness. Al-Thagr is a jinn rising from the dust and his lady crying in Aden, the last minute with. Ammar was not an emotional person by nature, as is the case with most men, but the last minute I spent with him was in a long embrace, during which we did not speak. He only said one sentence when he ended his embrace. I went to that car that remained parked for 3 years. On my return trip to Ammar, I went to the airport after. I bought some dried figs because I could not find any figs at that time, as it was not in season. I took the first plane towards the country of Ammar. During the trip, I felt shortness of breath more than the first time, which was when I was on my way to the airport, and the second was when I got on the last plane when I left the gate. The airport. After arriving in Ammar's hometown, I looked for a taxi to take me directly to where Ammar lived, but the driver refused and said, "I will not take you except to the city next to this address." So I agreed to a taxi and he took me to the place we agreed on, and from there I decided to rent a car from that town. The little girl, but after the taxi driver left, I discovered that there are no taxis in that city, as it is closer to the village than the city. I wandered around looking for someone who could take me to my destination, but I did not find anyone who was willing to do that. I started asking people about the possibility of giving me a ride, but some of them refused and some of them agreed but changed their minds. When he knew my destination, he did not stay in Morocco. A lot of times when I started to feel that I was in real trouble, I went to the mosque and prayed Maghrib and stayed in the mosque thinking about a way out of this place. Then a man approached me and sat in front of me and said to me, "Are you looking for something? You look strange and you are not from here." So I told him about my desire to go to Ammar's house. Without mentioning Ammar's name, because he warned me not to say his name to anyone. The man said to me, "Do you know anyone there?" So I hesitated to answer and said somewhat. He said, "Are you looking for Ammar?" and he remained silent. He said to me, "Bani Ammar, this is a bad person, and I do not advise you to go to him." So I told him my story, and he said to me, "Where is your faith in God?" I said, "Yes, by God," but he interrupted me and said, "No, but with faith in God, check with yourself, my son. This is the case. The end of the road is destruction," so I remained silent and could not answer. The man went on his way and I left the mosque while I was waiting for relief, but I did not find a solution. The call to prayer for the evening prayer was called, and I prayed and saw the man who spoke to me looking at me with a keen eye from among the crowds of worshippers who began to leave the mosque. I love that look. We left the mosque and saw someone riding in a car. I quickly went to him and offered to rent it from him, but he refused. Then I urged him. He said, "I don't want money from you." I said, "What do you want?" If he says to leave here, if I just want to take you back to the capital, I will take you there. I refused and left. The man became the street was empty of people, the place was quiet, and it was almost completely dark. Except for the mosque's lighting, which was cloudy due to some flying insects that were mingling with their light, and the sound
was the only sound around me. Then I felt shortness of breath, accompanied by a severe headache, which made me fall to my knees in intense pain. Then I heard laughter coming from the darkness surrounding me, and the pain increased until I fainted. I woke up in the morning in a house I did not know, so I left without knowing who carried me to it. I decided to go to Ammar's house on foot, as the distance did not exceed 10 kilometers, so I started heading towards his house, but the road was difficult because it was moving uphill and was not straight. When I was halfway through the road, I heard a voice approaching. Behind me, I turned around. I found the silhouette of a man approaching me. And when that silhouette reached me, I saw that he was the one who spoke to me in the mosque. He said to me, "I will walk with you until you arrive." I told him, "No, thank you. I do not want to come back." He said, "Don't worry. I will take you where you want. I don't want you to die." Here on this lonely road because of me, the man accompanied me to my destination and spoke to me on the way and tried to persuade me to return. But I did not respond to him, and I knew that he was the one who took me to his home yesterday, so I thanked him for that. When we arrived at Ammar's house, my heart became a little tight because I remembered those years in which I was confined to his library, and I remembered Ja standing outside. He has been paralyzed and unable to move for more than a year. I said goodbye to the man, and he asked me if I wanted him to wait. I said to him, "Thank you. You've been a great help, and I don't want you to be away from your home any longer." Before the man left, he looked at Ammar's house in a strange way, as if he saw a pile of uncovered garbage, and said, "A day will come when we will be less than you, you charlatan." I headed off to the door of Ammar's house, and before I knocked, I heard his voice from behind the door saying, "Did you bring the figs?" I smiled and entered his house. I entered Ammar's house and extended my hand to shake his hand, but he met me with a hug and a warm welcome that made me smile despite my distress. I extended the figs to him, and he laughed and said, "Haven't you forgotten that I sat with him and told him what happened with me, my brother, and my mother?" He then said, "The freed companion is one of the strongest devils, for he is weak when he is chained with his companion, but when he is freed, he becomes stronger and fiercer than any other demon." So I said to him, "Can't you stop him? Your companion did not come with you, and this is evidence that he wants to harm your family." So I said to him, "What should we do, Ammar?" Ammar was silent for a while, then said, "The only solution that is there. I think you will not like it." So I told him, "I will accept anything, Ammar. My mother is in danger, and every minute I delay, I put her life in greater danger." He said to me, "You cannot kill your companion because you will die with him." I told him, "It does not matter. The important thing is that I save my mother from him. If you really want to take a risk, then try the solution that I see." I told him, "What is your solution?" "The liberated mate is only stopped by another liberated mate who is older than him, and where can I get a liberated mate who is older than my mate?" So he pointed out anything. He shook his head outward while he was silent, so I shouted at him. He said, "You have no choice but this solution." I said, "It is impossible. How can he help me after I imprisoned him?" "Talk to him, he can hear you, and try to offer him a deal that he cannot refuse. The devils believe in giving in return. Do not underestimate them. They are smumhidi. She is not stupid, and her interests are paramount to her. He is now broken and shattered, certain that he is doomed, and for him you will be a lifeline, not a noose." So I told him, "How do I know that he agreed to my offer first before I am freed?" He told me, "You will not know, so you must take the risk." I sat thinking for more than an hour, while Ammar was sitting in front of me. He eats the figs I brought him. I said to Ammar after a long silence, "What will happen?" If he refused and I freed Ammar with a piece of fig in his mouth, coldly said, "He will kill you, of course." I looked at him in amazement. Then he said, "What do you want me to lie to you?" I told him, "I will go out." Ammar said, "Are you sure?" I told him, "No, but I have no other choice." I went out after I asked Ammar to return my body to my family and not bury me here if something bad happened to me. He said, "Your thinking is strange, Ophir." So I said to him, "Do you promise that to me?" He said, "Don't worry, I will not bury you here." I went out and started talking in the air and said, "I am Fear. I am the one who imprisoned you, and I am the only one who can free you. You agree to be under my command if I free you." I did not know what to say after these words, but this is what came to my mind at that moment. Then I added and said, "But before I free you, I want you to retie my horns. This is the price of your freedom. Now I will free you." Ammar brought me a mirror and placed it outside for me. He entered the house. I waited and carried out the preparation method when the sun went down, and a moment after I finished, I found myself stuck to the wall, my neck almost breaking from the pressure and the sound. Angry breaths blew in my ears, and after a few seconds of this stifling siege, I heard a voice in my ear saying "Muta," and then I fell directly to the ground. Ammar came out laughing and had in his mouth the last of the figs that I had brought for him, and he said, "Congratulations." Ammar threw the empty bag of figs at me and said, "Goodbye." I headed to the village. We walked on foot and made sure to pass by that man's house. the one who accompanied me to Ammar's house, no doubt, and I said goodbye to him because his reception was very nice, and he helped me more than once. After I said goodbye to him, the man directed me to the house of a person who delivered a ride to the airport, and from there I returned to my country on the first flight back to Jen. I arrived at my city's airport at midnight. The airport was quietly. I took a taxi and went home. I went straight to my room and slept and did not meet anyone that day. I woke up at noon the next day and I was very tired. I opened my eyes and saw in front of me a disturbing sight. I saw a chicken sitting in front of me and he had the appearance of that strange man. I got up and went to the bathroom and tried not to pay attention to him because I remember that Ammar told me before that demons are weaker. In front of someone who was not afraid of her or alarmed to see her, she entered the bathroom, and I did not care about the presence of a jinn, even though seeing his face after this period brought back memories that I did not want to remember. A jinn is one of the few devils that has the courage to pose comfortably in order to converse with a person without affectation. In broad daylight, his language was Arabic, but his accent was a strange mixture of local dialects. After I came out of the bathroom, he said to me, "Daja Naima." At that moment, I forgot that he was a devil. I said, "I told him, what do you want? Who allowed you to enter?" He said, "We have an agreement." So I told him, while I was changing my clothes, what is required. From me now, he said, "Consider your companion's issue closed, and the issue will not be taken from me. A few seconds and I will tie it up for you." But we did not talk about the new agreement. Any agreement. There is another devil left. You do not want me to rid you of it. What devil are you talking about? He said, "The one who is sitting on your poor mother's head and sitting eating from her health every day and just waiting for a signal from the magician to kill her." I was silent for a while. Then I said, "Isn't he my companion?" "Whoever threatens my mother's life," he said. "No, my mother's beloved. A second devil has been sent to her, and your husband has other concerns, and he is of no use to you and your mother." So I told him to get rid of him as well, and he said while smiling, "I'm sorry." The agreement was based on one person, but I realized at the time that John intended to stay with me in any way and would create problems in order to ensure Carrie staying around me and not freezing after he finishes his mission seemed to be here. He wants to make his fate depend on my fate, because that is the only guarantee he has to remain free. I tried to evade him as he was evading me, so I said to him, "What do you mean by just one? Choose one devil, but your companion or the one sent to your mother." I did not think much and gave him the order to deal with the devil who he threatens my mother until I think of a solution in which to deal with him and my kin. The Liberator. Daja disappeared in a second after I gave him permission to get rid of my mother's demon in place of my Quran. Minutes later, he returned with that damned smile on his face and said, "It's over, it's done." Before I could ask him about what he did in detail, something pounced on him and Daja appeared. By fighting with him fiercely, this conflict created a complete chaos in my room, which pushed me to take refuge in the bathroom to escape the chaos that had spread in my room. I closed the bathroom door and sat listening to the screaming and loud wailing that was coming from the room. After a few minutes, the sound stopped and silence spread throughout the place. Suddenly, the bathroom door began to shake due to a strong knock and impact. Repeatedly at the door, then the knocking stopped, and the screaming and wailing returned inside the room in a more intense form. Fortunately, my father and brother were not in the house at that time. When the sound stopped completely, I went out, dragging my steps through the silence of the room that had been turned upside down. I looked around and did not find a trace of a thug, but then, soon I heard John's exhausted voice saying with bated breath, "This Quran of yours is a curse, and I linked him to you at my expense this time today, and you are mine forever." I remained free after the Quran incident for a period of time, and we would meet whenever he wanted. He was trying every time to strike fear into my heart, but I no longer cared or was affected by his movements. Because I started to get used to it, and he said to me one day, "Don't be afraid that I will kill you at any moment." I replied to him and said, "Aren't you afraid that I will pronounce your name and be paralyzed at any moment?" Then, Dajan got angry and screamed. His scream was similar to the cry of an animal, and he said, "You are my slave." I told him, "I am a slave to God alone, and you are nothing but me." He created one of his creations, so he pushed me to the farthest part of the room, and I hit the wall and lost consciousness. Some may wonder why I did not speak. To his name at that moment, frankly, I wanted to test myself with him, because at that time I was tired of fear, tired of hiding. I wanted to break my fear with him and others, and this is what happened to me later. I was not surprised that Jinn did not kill me, as he wanted one of the humans to serve him, even though I was not a magician, because this is often the role of magic with demons. Therefore, he wanted to enslave me like the rest of the magicians, to take revenge on me for what I had done to him in the past, and to mock me to facilitate his desires in the future. Daja continued to terrorize and harm me for a period that exceeded a month. I was psychologically patient, but I started. I am physically tired, and after more than a month since his first appearance after my return from Amarsmoor, he appeared to me one night and said, "The end is with you." I responded spontaneously because I was sleeping and said, "Hello, Jinn." I did not hear a voice or a response, so I went back to sleep directly. When I woke up in the morning, I remembered what happened yesterday and realized that I had frozen him again. I waited quietly for the evening and came. The woman and I attended him again. The Daja did not attack me after the preparation, and I did not hear from him for several days until I thought that the preparation had not succeeded. So I brought the woman and was about to prepare him again, but I heard a voice coming from behind me and saying, "Stop, I am here." I said coolly, "Okay." I started preparing for sleep when I became certain that I had freed him again. He started talking to me in amazement and said, "Why did you bring me back? What do you want from me?" I told him, "No, I want something from you." He said, "Why did you free me?" I said to him, "Because I am not afraid of you." He said, "What is the purpose of what you are doing?" So I told him to prove to you that I am not a slave to you or to my fear. So he remained silent and left. He became mad. Then he came back laughing, taking the form of that strange man. He used to talk to me a lot, even if I was talking to others. I felt that he wanted to communicate with me more and more, and I did not know the reason for this sudden closeness, but I did not interact with him much, and I mostly ignored him. When I felt that he no longer frightened me, but on the contrary, he began to bother me, I decided to freeze him, forever. The day I decided to freeze Jinn, he was talking, as usual, about many things at the same time, and I also, as was my habit with him, was not focusing on his words or following him, and during his words flying in the air without listening permission, I decided within myself to pronounce his name, because I felt that his presence no longer served me, and my need for him ended with his return. I was aware of the death of the devil who was threatening my mother, and also to avoid any recklessness on his part, as in the end he remains a devil with unknown intentions. I decided not to introduce the topic and to say his name while he was talking to me. Suddenly, I approached him while he was talking about a topic that I was not listening to at the beginning, but I heard in his words when I approached him. Something made me tell him to repeat what I said a little while ago. He said, "I was telling you that Ammar was sending a powerful demon to your mother. Those were the days, but he was young and did not spend time with me." I said in an angry tone to Ammar. He said, "Ammar, what's wrong with you?" I said with calm anger, "Are you sure that Ammar was the one who sent the devil to my mother, and he was the one who asked him to harm her?" So he said, "Are you sure?" I said to him, "Is it true that demons transport people to any place in the blink of an eye?" He said while smiling, "Where do you want to go?" I told him, "The house of a front of Ammar's house," and Daja had taken on his human form when we stood in front of the entrance to the house and before I left. At the door, a man grabbed me by the arm and said to me in a low voice, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "I have an idea," so I said, "What is your idea, Ammar? He is not an ordinary magician, and you and I together will not be able to do it. I just want to talk to him. If I go in with you, Ammar will suspect us. If I don't go in with you, he will ask about me. You are arranging and preferring N. What is the solution in your opinion?" Jamdan said, "What, like what?" I told you to freeze me, and why should I do that? If you freeze me, he will see me frozen in front of him, and he will trust that you are still my enemy. So I repeated the question to him, and what is the purpose of that? He freed me at night while he was sleeping, and before that, an olive branch was placed at his head. I said, "Where can I get the olive branch?" In a moment, he extended his hand and gave it to me. Algozen said, "Ro, we returned tonight. I entered Ammar's house after I froze Daja. He hugged me, welcomed me, and asked how I was doing. While he was laughing, I saw that your companion was back beside you, so I said, 'Yes,' and he said, while smiling, 'Was this the work of a jinn?' I said, 'Yes,' and he laughed and said, 'Where is he now?' I told him, 'I froze him before I entered upon you.' He laughed hard and said, 'It is evil for you.' You began to understand the principles of magic. So I remained silent and just smiled, watching the sun, waiting for sunset. Ammar invited me to his house and said, smiling, 'You are lucky. I have just finished preparing your favorite hariz. Are you still preparing that disgusting hariz, Ammar?' He said while laughing, 'I can never do without it.' I ate dinner with him and waited for him to fall asleep to put in the olive branch he gave me. He went to his head, but he talked for a long time and continued with me until I fell asleep. I woke up before dawn and quickly got up to find that Ammar had also fallen asleep. So I placed an olive branch at his head and hurried to the woman and prepared a demon. The moment I finished preparing, Ammar's head flew in front of me and his blood was scattered throughout the room. Part of that blood stained my clothes and a demon came out in its original form. Al-Bushra smiled and said, "Ammar, the Sultan's magician, fell with his head, the prestige of the magician." I did not understand the words of Dajan, who was looking with a frightening smile at Ammar's body lying on the ground, and blood was still coming from his neck, which had recently been separated from his head. I shouted at him forcefully and said, "Why did you kill him?" He responded and said, "We are coming to play," so I told him why. Did I want to kill him? He said, "If we had not killed him, we would have killed him." He remained silent in horror, the situation, and I did not speak. I was sad for Ammar, but whenever I remembered what he did to my mother, my sadness for him eased. We walked away. I told him to wait. I want to visit someone before we leave, and this is his time. Who is good? So I said, "No, wait here until I come back." He said while laughing, "Don't be late." I don't know how to fly at night. I went to the house of that man who took me to Ammar's house on my last visit, and I took the road down through the crossing that leads me to the village. I reached his house on foot, and the morning had already risen. I knocked on his door, and his little daughter opened for me, and I said to her, "Where is your father?" She remained silent and entered quickly, and after a few minutes of standing in front of the open door, someone other than the man who gave me a ride came out, and I asked him about. The man said, "There is no man in this house except me." I said, "It is impossible. I am sure that this house is his house. Please search the house." I said to him, No, I will never forgive you, but I am sure that that man lives here." He asked me, "What is his name?" So I said, "No." "I know," so he said to me, "Describe his appearance." So I described the man's features to him. He said with amazement, "This is my father." I said to him, "Did I not tell you that I was right? It seems that at that time he was visiting you. Tell me where his house is, and I will go to him myself." The man said, "Follow me." I walked with the son of the man I was looking for a while until he stopped. About walking, when we reached a place with a large extended wall, and he told me before he left, "My father is behind this wall. Go and talk." To him I said, "How will I know?" He said to me, "Ask about Salem." I did not find a door for the wall. I walked until I reached a large gate with a guard on it. He prevented me from entering. I told him, "I want to meet Salem." He said, "Please come in. He is inside." I entered and was shocked by the sight. I saw a group of people. The graves, and the man's grave was among them. I was in the village cemetery, and the man had been dead for 10 years. I asked the cemetery guard about the man I saw. I asked him how he died, and he told me his story. The cemetery guard, Salem, said, "He was a pious and righteous man, and all the people of the village loved him, and when he was young, it was him and his older brother. Responsible for the village mosque, and takes turns giving the call to prayer and leading the prayer. In it, People trusted them very much until that day when a strange man came to the village and bought one of the houses that was for sale and lived in it. At first, people did not know that he was a magician, as he claimed to be righteous and offered people his services, such as treating magic and binding, and reading for the sick and the possessed. But no one in the village was suffering from these things, so no one would visit him or ask for his services. And after several months had passed, some people began to show symptoms of strange diseases and psychological problems for which medicine could not find solutions. And after their despair and lack of resourcefulness, some began to go for that. The man, whenever anyone went to him, came out healthy, and over time his fame spread. Among the people of the village, Salem and his older brother did not like the situation because that man was exploiting and depriving people of their money unjustly, so they decided to go to his house and reach an understanding with him. Salem knocked on the door, and the magician opened for them and said, "What do you want?" Salem responded angrily, "Get out, you and Hocus Blossom." From the village, so the magician laughed and said, "Who are you to expel me?" Salem said, "I am the sheikh of the village, and you are committing a great sin against yourself and against the people of the village. I will not allow you to continue this immorality." The magician said, "I and the people of the village know best about its affairs, so do not interfere in anything that does not mean anything." The magician closed the door after his words in Salem's face. His older brother got angry and knocked on the door forcefully, but it did not open the magician. Salem's brother broke the door and entered the magician forcefully. Salem followed him and found the magician free among a group of talismans, and the place smelled bad. The magician shouted at them and said, "Get out of here before you regret it." They attacked him and beat him until he almost died and dragged him to the center of the village with blood flowing. From his face and his clothes were torn, and the people gathered around them, and Salem said in a loud voice, "This man is a magician and a deceiver, and he is the one who made you sick so that you would resort to him." The people became angry and expelled him from the village and burned the house in which he lived. After the magician was expelled, within days the girls of the village began to disappear at the rate of 1 or 2 girls per week. They disappear only in the middle of the night, no matter how hard their families try to shut them down. The doors and their protection were still disappearing, and in some cases, the parents heard their daughter's screams before she disappeared. With the repeated disappearances, Salem and his older brother met with the elders of the village to look into the matter and find a solution to this problem that began to worry them. After a long meeting in Salem's house, the elders of the village concluded that it may have been the work of the magician they expelled in retaliation for what they had done to him. That one of them suggested that Salem go to the capital in search of his assistant. Salem agreed, but his brother refused and said, "I am the one who will go to the village and its people need you." So Salem's brother set off for the capital and returned after a week. He returned with a strange man wearing a ball. The people asked, "Who is the perpetrator?" The strange man responded in a calm voice and said, "He is bold." So everyone remained silent and began to whisper about what happened. Then Salem said, "Who is this Jassar? Why is he attacking our village?" The man told them the story of the devil Jassar and how the sorcerer who was expelled by the villagers attacked them. After the people heard the story of Jassar, terror struck their hearts. But Salem's brother reassured him and said, "Do not be afraid. This man will be saved from him, but he needs some help from you." They said that he should ask for whatever he wants, but what is important is that he be saved. "Our daughters." So the man asked them for a piece of clothing for every person in the village and wanted to bring it to the mosque before the sunset prayer. The people dispersed to fulfill his request when the place was empty of people, and only Salem and his brother and the stranger remained. Salem took his older brother aside and said, "Who is this man and where is this?" "I found him," so his brother said. "I was asking the imam of one of the mosques to show him the problem we were facing. Then this man came and told me that he had a solution to our problem." Salem said in a low, angry voice, "How can you trust someone you know nothing about?" His brother responded and said, He has proven to me that he knows the solution. He has mentioned to me the names of the missing girls, all of them, as well as their ages and a description of their appearance. Salem responded with anger, and his voice was spum. He started to rise a little and said, "This is something that raises suspicion, not trust." His brother said, "What do you mean?" The strange man interrupted their conversation and said, "Is there a problem?" Salem said angrily, "Yes, there is a problem." The man replied, "What is it?" Salem said, "How did you know all this information about the girls of the village?" The man replied calmly, "Because I am a magician." Salem and his older brother were shocked and said, "A magician?" He said, "Yes, a magician. I will save you from Jassar and his master with a sum of money. If you do not want that, I will leave." The man was about to leave, so Salem's brother grabbed him by the hand and said, "Calm down, Sheikh." Salem shouted at his brother and said, "What's the matter, Sheikh? This is an infidel magician." The magician said, "Watch your tongue." Salem shouted and said, "I will not deal with a magician even if." All the girls of the village disappeared, and the man said, "As you wish," and the magician left Salem's house. His older brother said, "What have you done, Salem?" Salem said, "Let him go to hell. We will not disbelieve in order to be saved. God is the protector." Salem's brother went out after the man, begging and asking him to stay and trying to pamsus. He explained to his brother what he had said, but the man refused and left. Maghrib came, and the people brought what the man asked of them. But they did not find it. Salem said to the people gathered at his door, "Let us pray the Maghrib prayer, then let us talk about the matter in the mosque." After the prayer, Salem ascended the pulpit and explained the situation to the people of the village. The people's reactions varied between supporters and supporters. A man shouted from among the angry crowd and said, "You don't care because your daughter doesn't care. She fell into your arms," and Salem said, "By God, if I were able, I would offer a ransom for your daughters." Some people said in one voice, "Amen." After that, the people left the mosque, and some of them complained about Salem's position and his unique opinion. Salem and his brother remained in the mosque, thinking about solving this problem, and did not even leave. The time for the evening prayer approached, and shortly before the call to prayer, one of the villagers entered and shouted with joy, "My daughter Salem has returned." The scene was repeated with another person, then another, until all the villagers gathered in the mosque, cheering and saying, "Allahu Akbar," with joy. Salem was very happy between the people's chanting and Allahu Akbar, so Salem's brother allowed him to pray. After dinner, people prayed together, and some of them cried. During the prayer, out of great joy, after the prayer ended, the people dispersed, and Salem and his brother went home. Salem was married, but his older brother was single. They lived in the same house with their mother, Salem's wife, and his 4 children. Salem and his brother entered and heard their mother and Salem's wife crying, so Salem asked him, "What's wrong with you?" His wife replied as she was crying hard, "Your daughter has disappeared, Salem." Salem fell to the ground in shock and the horror of the situation. His brother picked him up and took him to the bed. Salem was screaming, "I am the reason for her disappearance." Salem's brother quickly went to his brother's wife and said to her, "I will go out to look for an assistant. Stay with him." Salem's brother went to play. At night, he searched for the man whom Salem had expelled from his house, until he found him and told him the story that happened after his departure. And the man said, smiling sarcastically, Jasar took your brother's son and returned the rest because her father prayed for her, and perhaps it was an hour of response, so let him bear what happened to him. Salem's brother got down on his knees and begged the man to help him, but he refused. He said, "Your brother has insulted me, and I will not help him, even if I fall down prostrate at his feet." Salem's brother said, "Ask whatever you want, but return my brother's son to him." The man was silent for a while, then said, "I will do so, but on one condition." Salem's brother said, "Ask whatever you want." The man said, "You must be my servant until one of us dies." Salem's brother agreed. Without hesitation, he said, "Return my brother's son to her family, and I will be your servant forever." The man smiled and said, "I have." The girl returned, and before you finished speaking, Salem's brother thanked the man and asked him to bid farewell to his family for the last time before spending the rest of his life as his servant. The man agreed and gave him only 1 day. Salem's brother returned quickly to his family and found his nephew in her father's arms, so he was happy about that. He was happy and bid them farewell and told them that he had found a job in the capital and would be gone for a period of time. Salem hugged his brother, and his brother began to cry bitterly because he knew that it was the last time he would see Salem's face. His embrace of him was strong, and his embrace of his mother was stronger. Salem asked his brother when he saw him in this state and said, "What's wrong?" Salem's brother said, "Nothing, but I will miss you." Salem said to him, "How can you say nothing when you bid us farewell forcefully? As if you will never see us again, do not go to this work if you cannot bear to part with us." Salem's brother said, wiping his tears, "Never mind, my brother. I have not gotten used to parting with you for more than a week before." Salem's brother carried his luggage and walked toward the door on his way toward the capital. Salem followed him and grabbed him. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Don't stay away for too long, Ammar. The mosque needs you." The story of the devil Jasar as told by the strange man. Jasar is the youngest son of the rebellious Qurayn. He is one of the biggest rebellious devils. He was the victim of many magicians who tried to prepare him. Maz went out of his owner's control when he tried to prepare him for his vision, and as soon as he was freed, a joker killed his friend and everyone his family. Since that time, he has been dominating people, and no one has been able to stop him. Maza joined the Dune tribe and was able to assume leadership of the clan after a short time by marrying the son of the tribe's leader. He had 7 children, the eldest of whom was the most powerful and beloved to his heart. He was bold because he resembled his mother, which raised Mazer's reputation, while the devils were evil. And in turn, Jessar also raised his father's name high among the demon lords with his strength and courage that he showed in the tribe's wars with other tribes. Jessar remained the apple of his father's eye, Maz, until that day when Jessar fell in love with a human girl, and this was forbidden in the community of devils. But it was allowed for the masters, and yet it was the masters who were considered Jessar and his family. Among them, exalt themselves and avoid loving people more than others because they see it as desecration of a race and a decline in their tribal level. Maza prevented his son Jassar from visiting her, but Jassar disobeyed his father's order and returned to visit that girl. But his matter was revealed and he was sentenced to exile for life. Young and novices were robbed, did not catch up on reading the talisman of binding the devil who bound Jassar, and in the blink of an eye, the devil divided the magician into 2 halves, so she sold Habe. They came from behind him and killed him before he noticed his presence, so Jassar broke free from his chains and began screaming and screaming excitedly to investigate when he said to him, "Duck, come on, mister. Where is your promise?" Jassar said, "If you do not move away from me, then Sam, I will spare you, you contemptible companion." So Jassar said, "Ah, have you come out?" Your words, and before Jassar could respond to him, Daja attacked Jassar, but Jassar was much stronger than him, so he knocked him to the ground in the blink of an eye and grabbed his neck, but he did not kill him. He told him, "I will spare you only because you helped me. Therefore, as soon as I leave without coming back, otherwise you will not see the light, O companion." Jassar left the magician's house and killed every magician who had previously used it to fulfill his needs. He killed them all in one day so that they would not beware each other, to the point that the other magicians became terrified that the same fate would befall them, even if they had never dealt with Jassar before. Jassar then disappeared, and no one heard from him until a skilled magician from Hijaz was able to prepare him and use him to kidnap women, and Jassar continued to serve that sorcerer until the sorcerer died, but Jassar did not stop kidnapping and became known in this capacity. Only someone who has reached a great degree in the knowledge of sorcery can prepare it. It seems that the sorcerer whom you attacked was of great ability, and he cast Jassar on you, Ammar, and ascending to the abyss. Ammar arrived at the house of the strange man who asked. He worked for him for the rest of his life, which it later turned out to be Vili. A great magician and famous among magicians, Ammar began serving him immediately upon his arrival and organizing his appointments with his visitors from all countries. Ammar spent many years with the magician, which made him gradually lose his faith and become involved in the evil world of magic and sorcery. During that period, the magician taught Ammar some secrets. The profession until Ammar became one of the famous magicians in the capital. During that period in which Ammar mastered most of the secrets of the profession, a man came crying at the magician's door and asked to enter. She asked her permission while Ammar stood next to the magician and heard what was going on between them. The man said that he had married a few months ago to a girl who was much younger than him, and since then he married her, and nightmares began to haunt him. A frightening figure surrounded by smoke would come to him, threatening him that if he approached her, he would kill him. He was ordering him to divorce her. In every nightmare, the magician replied to him and said, "Do you have enough money?" The man said, "I am a well-known merchant, and I have enough money." The magician asked him for a large sum, and the man paid it. Without hesitation, he kissed the magician's hand and said to him, "Please, save me from what I am in." The magician ordered Ammar to deliver the man and said to the merchant, "Do not be afraid, you will not see anything after this day." Ammar returned after delivering the man to the door and found the magician talking and muttering. She went behind the door to hear his words, because Ammar was using this, the way to memorize the talisman that has not been. The magician was telling him about it so that Ammar would not outperform him and remain weaker than him and always in need. Ammar heard some talismans that he had never heard before, and after the magician had finished with them, thick smoke appeared in the room, and the magician began talking to that smoke, saying, "Stop, Jassar." He stopped chasing the merchant and now headed to the sister of the senior official. The smoke quickly disappeared, and the magician remained silent and closed his eyes. Ammar came in after waiting a little and said, "Do you command me to do something else, sir?" The magician said to him, "No, leave me alone now, Ammar." Ammar left, thinking about warning the sister of the senior official, because he knew now. The magician was the one who sent Jassar to the village, and he was the one who ordered Jassar to be kidnapped. His nephew. So Ammar decided to warn the senior official's sister, but the matter was not easy, and Ammar was unable to reach the senior official or his sister to warn him. Days passed, and Ammar forgot the story until a person entered with a group of people and asked about the magician by name, and he answered them. Ammar told them that he was busy, so they pushed and entered the magician forcefully and told him that the senior official's sister has been suffering for weeks from something that has been messing with her every night. We tried everything until one of them told us that you are good at dealing with these things. Is this true? The magician said yes, but I want to meet the official in person. One of them replied and said, "Why do you want to meet him?" The magician said, "The matter requires some examination and inquiry, and you will not be of use to that." So the men consulted, and Ammar was behind them, watching and hearing what was going on between them. Then one of the men said, after consulting with the rest, that we must ask the senior official himself, as the decision is not in our hands. The magician replied to them and said, "As you wish." The men went out, and the magician asked Ammar to come out and close the door behind him. Ammar closed the door, but he did not come out and hid in the room. He heard the magician using the same talismans that came with the smoke, And in fact, the smoke appeared, and the magician said to him, "Make their night hell, Jassar. I want the senior official to come himself, kneeling at my feet to ask me. Help," and he disappeared. The smoke quickly spread, and Ammar was unable to leave for fear of being exposed, so Ammar stayed in the room until the morning, until the magician came out. He then went out quickly to the house of the senior official to warn him, but the guards prevented him, so he sat at the door of the magician's house, thinking for an hour after Ammar sat at taps. The door of the magician's house was approached by the same men who had come to the magician yesterday, with signs of fear and anxiety on their faces, and they said to Ammar, "Where is Sai?" So Ammar said to them, "Ammar came out," and one of them shouted and said, "When will he return?" Ammar responded and said, "I do not know, but I can help." The man looked at him with the arms and said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am Ammar's assistant." The man said to him, "There is no way he can help. Come with us." Ammar went. Because the senior official was short, the official received him well and asked him to examine his sister, so he did. Then the official said to him, "Can you help her?" Ammar said to him, "No, I cannot." The official got very angry and shouted at Ammar and accused him of charlatanism and lying. But Ammar told him, "But I know who can," so he calmed down the official and said, "Please guide me to him." Ammar raised his index finger to the sky and said, "God, there is no God but He, the ever-living, the ever-subsisting." The official cried, and Ammar approached him and said to him, "God will not disappoint you if you pray to Him, and do not make the same mistake that I made by resorting to someone else." Ammar left the palace, and behind him was the voice of the official. He cries and prays that Ammar went home, and the magician had not returned. He sat on the magician's chair and began reading the talismans to summon Jassar, and when he came, Ammar said to him, "I want you to turn the magician's life into hell tonight, and then you are free, Jassar. But before you leave, bring me his head." After Jassar's tricks, Ammar went to bed and slept without tufting, to wait for the magician to come, as he was accustomed to doing. Ammar woke up the next morning to find the magician's head next to him, looking at him with open eyes, flies flying around him, and his mouth open, his teeth shattered, and some blood on his eyelashes. Ammar got up from his bed very calmly, grabbed the magician's head, and threw it away from his bed. And since then, today, 3 decades ago, no one knows why Ammar did not return to his family in the village. Instead, he chose to move to the foot of a mountain near it. And he took with him all the magician's books, and remained there until today, the last days of Salem, as the cemetery guard told him. The cemetery guard continued his speech by talking about what happened to Salem, Ammar's brother, during that period, and said, after the departure of Ammar to the capital, Salem remained in the village with his family, and his life returned to normal, and their lives continued normally, until Salem longed to see his brother Ammar, who had been gone for more than 2 years. So he consulted his family and then decided to go to the capital to visit him, but he did not know where to find him, so he decided to ask in the mosques, "Perhaps your worker is a muezzin, or imam," because Ammar's voice was very beautiful when Salem arrived in the capital. He searched for his brother in the mosques, but he did not find him. He remained in the capital looking for him for more than a week, until he gave up and decided to return to the village. But God willing, Salem saw his brother Ammar in the market, and he was buying some things. Salem was very happy and quickly went to him to hug him. But Ammar pretended that he did not know him for fear that the magician would see him, because the magician threatened him that if he saw Salem again, he would kill him. Ammar evaded his brother and denied knowing him, but Salem insisted on talking to him until Ammar pushed him and ran away. Salem pursued his brother after he pushed him in the market, and Salem was keen to catch up. Ammar without realizing it until Ammar entered the magician's house, which prompted Salem to ask a passerby by saying, "Whose house is this?" He replied to him and said, "A sheikh reads to people." And Salem smiled and said, "Praise be to God." But that did not answer the question that was going on in Salem's head, which was why Ammar denied him and did not want to talk to him. Salem decided to stay another night in the capital until he talked to his brother and knew the answer to his question. And at night, Salem heard a knock on the door of his room that he had rented to spend the night that night. and a conversation took place between him and a stranger at the door for a period not exceeding a few minutes. Then Salem then returned to his room, and the person who was engaging in conversation left. The owner of the residence that Salem had rented conveyed these words to the security authorities, who came in the morning to investigate. "Let's take Salem to the hospital. He has gone crazy, Salem." Minutes after his visitor left, lost his mind that night and began screaming all night until the owner of the residence was forced to inform security. Salem remained in the hospital for several months, and his family, who visited him regularly, was notified until the last day before his death 10 years ago, and the words ended. The cemetery guard took bloody steps backwards. I started walking towards the village, returning from the cemetery after hearing the story that the guard told me. I began to think that I had wronged Ammar, and that Dajan had deceived me in order to facilitate the process of killing him, because he would not have been able to do that without the olive branch that shared Ammar's bed with him yesterday. But I did not know the reason for this. Jinn killed Ammar. I reached the village and did not go to Beit Salem and continued on my way to the house of Ammar, whose death has not yet spread because he lives in isolation on the foot of the mountain, away from people. A short distance before I reached Ammar's house, a cameo appeared at me and seemed upset and told me why I was late, so I did not answer him and continued on my way, and he remained the whole way while I was walking. Towards Ammar's house, he spoke to me nervously and said, "Why are you coming back? Okay, let's walk." I did not answer him until I reached the door of Ammar's house. Then I fell silent. Then I turned my gaze towards him and said, "I don't know why I killed him, but I know that it cannot be the person who sent the devil to my mother. You have succeeded in deceiving me to help you, even if you wanted. If this help is returned to me one day, then tell me. As for now, to honor the dead person, bury him." I entered the house and he remained indoors. Outside Samit, I cleaned the house of blood as much as I could and buried Ammar under a tree that he always loved to take shade in. Then I prayed for him and went back towards his house. I went to Deg and said to him in a sharp tone, "Take me back to my home." He said, "I won't take you back." So I shouted at him and said, "Take me back, you devil." For the first time, I heard a jinn say, "Yes, sir." In the blink of an eye, I was in front of my house. I entered the house and reassured my family. I went to my room and slept for a long time that day. Days passed and the appearance of a jinn in front of me became less and less, and this appearance decreased until I began to forget something called a jinn. After a few months had passed, a jinn appeared to me shortly before the sunset prayer. He said that the Yaram tribe are seeking revenge against your relative who killed him, and they are coming tonight because they kill your companion, and if your companion dies, you die with him. So I said to him, "Why do you care?" He smiled and said, "I am used to you, brother." I was silent for a while and thought about this tribe that I had read about in Ammar's books. They were called the tribe of the Abata, and they were among the Alawite and tribal devils that spread in Neds. Their veins and their entire lives are wars with the tribes of humans and jinn, and there is no room for understanding with them. He is presented as an ordinary member of that tribe, but rather he was one of the sons of its masters, and they will not leave his blood without retaliation. I asked Jinn and said to him, "What do you think is the solution? We should see a tribe that is hostile to them and ask for their protection." I said to him, "Are you crazy? The protector is God," and he said, "My brother, don't sit around getting upset over me and get frustrated and see what you have until the Maghrib prayer, and after that, you and your partner, Fatfas, responded to Dajan's words with ease, especially since he said that they would not be satisfied with me, but rather they would kill all of my family, and their harm might extend to my relatives, and I did not know whether that was the truth or another trick of Dajan in order for me to respond to him, but I was not ready to discover this and risk my family's life. So I said to Dajan, "What should we do now? Let's go back to Ammar's house, because the devils will not be able to think about approaching his house." In the blink of an eye, we were there, and I entered the house, but Dajan stayed outside, so I said to him, "Why don't you let the man who was preventing you in?" Dajan died, and Dajan remained silent. He did not respond to me and just looked at the sky and stayed outside. The moon was full that night, and the weather was beautiful. I went out to enjoy the beautiful nature in that place. I saw a jinn sitting and still staring at the sky. I could not blame him. The sky that night was clear and free of clouds. The moon, although its light was full, the stars around it were clear. I sat next to the jinn, which was in his same shape. We remained silent for a while. Then Daja spoke and said, "Ammar was not as good as you think. All magicians show you goodness at first, but they have a day and they are exploited." I said to him, "What do you know?" He said, "Believe me, I am telling you that the course of the discussion changed when I asked him and said, 'What should we do now? We have come a long distance and it must be done. We have a next step.' He said that the Alabata tribe is a strong tribe and there is no equal to it. In power, there is only one tribe, and they are the tribe of the dunes. I said to him, 'Isn't this the Jassar tribe?' He said, 'Yes.' So I said to him, 'Have you lost your mind?' He said, 'Why me?' And I said, 'How can a tribe like them stand up to the oppressors for the sake of someone like me?' He said, 'Leave it on me, no.' He was afraid, so I told him, 'Explain to me what you are going to do.' He said, 'Why don't you trust me?' I told him, 'Of course not.' He laughed and got up from his place and then disappeared. I stayed outside for a while, looking at the shining of the stars. Although I had spent 3 years of my life in this place, I did not enjoy the stunning views that were there. Through a glass window, I entered Ammar's house after I fell asleep to sleep. I put my head on his bed, which had some drops of blood on it. I did not pay attention to cleaning them, so I turned my head in the other direction and saw the olive branch, which had dried up and shrunk to a small size, and nothing remained of it except its fragments, which were easy to blow out. So I blew my eyes out of sleep after I saw the dry olive branch. He flies in front of me, so I sat on the edge of the bed, resisting the feeling of sadness for Ammar, and saying to myself that they are just magicians who do not deserve our compassion or sadness. I was in a battle to convince myself of that. My eyes became teary and my thoughts choked me. I got out of bed after I was certain that sleep would not visit me that night, and began to wander around Ammar's house, which he was my home for 3 years, and I began to remember my days with him and remember those with a smile. The books and the disgusting food he brought me. I was walking around the house, recalling memories that were painful at the time. I entered the office, and for the first time I had the choice whether to read or not. I felt a comfortable feeling because I was not forced to read any of it after today. I was looking at the shelves and smiling, but my smile disappeared. When my eyes fell on a book that I had not seen in the library before, I thought to myself that perhaps it was a book like the other books, and I had not paid attention to it before, but I was certain that I had looked at every book in the library at least once, even though I had only read 2/3 of them from cover to cover. And this book was not among them when I was here looking curious, Maldo. It was tearing me apart, and I didn't know why. I started to resist the urge to open it, and I decided to hold it. I just went to the book, grabbed it, sat on the table, and put it on it, and I said to myself, "What are you doing? Haven't we finished reading what we don't know?" The book remained in front of me for about half an hour. As I stared at it, the color of the book was red, without a title, and large in size, unlike the usual books in the library, which increased my curiosity more and more. But in the end, after thinking about it, I realized that if I opened the book without need, knowing that it might harm me, that would nullify the argument I used in the past for my entry into the book. This world, and I will have lost myself forever. I went back to bed, sought refuge in God, and slept. Tonight my sleep did not last long. I woke up to the voice of a jinn calling me from outside and saying, "Go to sleep." I went out and I was exhausted. Then a jinn grabbed my shoulders with his hand and shook me hard while saying, "The group has agreed." I said, "What group?" And the dunes said, "What else?" So I said, "They agreed to what?" "Exactly." He said, "To protect you and me from the oppressors." And sleep broke, some of which was still stuck in my eyes, and I told him how I convinced them. He said, "Malik has entered. The important thing is that the guards are with us now." I said, "What guards?" And John looked at the horizon and said, "Let him see you guys." Then a large cloud of smoke formed in front of me. When it cleared, 3 people appeared, one of them a woman. They were not exactly like humans, but they were laughings. They are a little larger and their features are sharper. I said, "These are some of them." He said, "Our guards are from the tribe, that is, like the brothers." I said, "What is the benefit of them?" He laughed and said, "You do not know the benefit of the brothers," meaning personal guards for him. I said, "What is the return?" One of them spoke angrily, and he was larger, and he spoke to Jin and said, "No." Your friend knew the agreement, so signs of confusion appeared on Dajan, and he said, "Sure, he knows, but he is still awake from sleep and not focused. Can you give us a chance to talk a little?" Then the big man said, "The guards in front of us also left." I turned my gaze to Dajan and said, "What's the matter, Satan?" So Dajan said to me, "Look, I will tell you exactly what happened, but keep in mind that I had no other solution to help you one mistorge." So I told him, "Speak and do not evade," and he said, "Okay, listen to the agreement that Dajan made with the Dune tribe." Dain made me sit. Then he said, "See, how old are you?" I wondered one day why Ammar was so strong and why I was not able to enter his house and why when we killed him. So I interrupted him and said, "You." I killed him, not me. He said, "It's not a problem. It's not a problem. Let us continue." I said to him, "Continue." When Ammar died, I tried to convince you that we were moving quickly. I said yes, and I was surprised by your haste, because Ammar is not an ordinary magician. He is a magician under protection. Under protection. He said, "Under protection," meaning protected from the underworld for that. The demons were afraid of him and were afraid to attack him, so I said, "How did he get that protection?" He said, "Listen to the story. All of them, and do not interrupt." So I said, "Go ahead." Dajan told me that after Ammar returned from the capital and chose to reside in this mountain instead of returning to his family, he began reading the books of the great magician, most of which were out of Ammar's reach during the period of his service to that magician and during his reading on Hunmerd. Over the course of months, his eye fell on a very rare book, and the reason for its rarity is that it contains methods for preparing demon lords and talismans for binding and harnessing them. This process is very difficult and requires high capabilities, but Ammar tried and succeeded. Ammar read one of the preparation pages in that book, and his choice of the page was apparently random because the page belongs to preparing Shand, a tribe leader ins. He is one of the tribes of demons, and he avoids magic in general, so that you can communicate with it, let alone preparing and harnessing it. Shind was the leader of the Sawarim tribe, and he was the first of his descendants. He founded his tribe hundreds of years ago, and no one has succeeded him since he assumed leadership, because he is one of the long-lived demons, and he did not abandon his leadership of the tribe. Since its founding, despite the very large number of his sons and daughters, Ammar read the talisman that was in front of him, and in moments, the leader of the Al-Sawarim tribe, Shind, came to him, chained and tied under Ammar's feet. He kept screaming and threatening Ammar with death and torture. Ammar was frightened by the sight and began to realize that he had committed a grave mistake by tampering with those advanced talismen. Ammar knows how to free this demon, even if he freed him. Will he forgive him for that insult? Ammar continued reading that book in the hope of arriving at a solution that would rid him of that devil who screams in front of him and shakes the parts of his house with that screaming and wailing. Ammar's eye fell on a line on one of the pages of the book, and the line said, "From knocking." Bob juned and presented her with Shin's head. "It will remain for us a sword, and we will remain for him a scabbard." Ammar did not understand any of this, but it is the only place in the book where the name Shind was mentioned again. So he decided to read the talisman that followed that line. Immediately after reading the talisman, a huge demon appeared before Ammar, accompanied by a woman, Jamila, and as soon as Shind saw them, he shouted louder and threatened Ammar, telling him, "We will chase them until we tear your soul from your body, O sorcerer." And before Shind finished speaking, the big man took out a sword that separated Shind's head from its place, causing his body to fall to the ground without moving. The big man lowered his sword and then pointed with his hand, and a group of men appeared and carried a body. Shind went out with him and left his head on the ground, while Ammar stood with his mouth open between the head and its part. The big man approached him and said to him, "From now until eternity, you will be ours." Her dowry had arrived. After his marriage to this woman, Ammar discovered that she was the soldier of his son, Tazah, the leader of the tribe Dunes, the devil who killed Shind in his house, and her dowry was the head of the leader of the Sawarim tribe, because the conflict and rivalry between the two tribes over sovereignty was old and bloody, and neither of them was able to eliminate the other, until Ammar, out of his ignorance, intervened in the picture and prepared the leader of the Sawarim tribe. I could not control myself, interrupted Daja and shouted at him and said, "Are you foolish? We are running away from Thar from the Yaram tribe, only to fall into Thar with the Dune tribe because of Ammar." Daja laughed hard and said, "My beloved, the devils do not take Thar for humans, so do not be afraid." So I said to him, "What is the matter? If the Dunes failed to protect Ammar from me, it was because of the olive branch that you placed there. His head is this Al-Ghozan blinded his guards and gave me the opportunity to kill him, so they don't know who killed him. By the way, their responsibility ends with protection, but they don't follow any traces or blood." So I said to him, "How did they come with you?" Then he became silent, and I said in an angry tone, "Ammar spoke about his marriage to Jund has become the blogger of the tribe, and every blogger has an heir, and this heir inherits the responsibilities of the blogger before him and the protection he enjoyed." So I said, "What's the matter with me?" He said, "What do you think?" After I told them that you are Ammar's heir, I said to him, "How did they believe in this simplicity?" He said, "Simply. The guards testified that you sat with him for 3 years, which was the period. What was necessary to qualify the heir? So I told him that I had spent my time searching for a way to stop it. Would not happen. Stupid and out of my sight. Ammar, my love, he was able to stop me and save you from the first moment he saw me, and I was with you at a door. But he chose you to be his heir and forced you to read the books in his library with a trick that you had to say my name or die. And when you were sure that you were ready, and I realized that he threw the book with my name in front of you without noticing, and I am sure that you found it by coincidence, and I would not be surprised if he was not the one who suggested the book to you to read that day." I remained silent in shock, and during my silence he said, "I did not tell you that Ammar is a malicious person, and by the way, I forgot to tell you something else." After that, I said, "I forgot what? Haven't the misfortunes that are in store for you have ended?" And he said while smiling, with malice, placing his hand on his shoulder, "The coming calamity is more beautiful. I forgot to tell you that the heir will inherit from the wife yet. So prepare yourself tonight, groom, and do not let us down." John laughed after this speech and then disappeared. I stayed at home, beating hands, thinking about John's words and the disaster that had befallen on my head and how Ammar manipulated me all those years. After an hour, the sun had set completely. Daja came back and said, smiling, "You prepared yourself for the night." I looked at him and said, "Why did you do that to me? What did I do to you? What did you want me to do to you?" "I mean, the Yaram tribe got news that you are here, and there are planners who are killing your companion and you. You won't be able to control them if you hide from here until tomorrow." I told him, "If I knew what you were going to do, I would flee. You chose death without hesitation. You would not have chosen death. Then I am with you on the matter, and Yaram's group included me with you in the retaliation. I mean, there is no escape. I needed protection like you, and frankly, I am not pledging allegiance to myself." So I said to him, "And what does it have to do with you for the Dunes to protect you?" So he said, "The Dunes were protecting the blogger and his property, so I told them that I am your slave." So I smiled and told him, "But I thought you wanted me as your slave." And he said, "No, things are different now, and see, when you are soldiers with you, do not lose faith with me so that we will not be exposed." I told him, "Don't worry, I will treat you as you deserve." She got up and asked Jen how I would get married. From his devil, so he said, "Do not be afraid. There is not much difference between our harem and your harem. On the contrary, our harem can be. It's easier." So I laughed, and I didn't want to laugh, but the evil one became crazy, and his words were charming. I told him, "But I've never been married before, and I don't know human women for you to compare me to them." He said, "Do not be afraid, O sons of Adam. She never saw her come to you, except in a state of confusion. He has a human body, so you will not feel a difference." So I told him, "This is not my biggest concern." He stopped me from joining my friends on my wedding night,